Kramatorsk, Donetsk region. The Russian army attacked using Tornado-S multiple launch rocket systems and aerial bombs. A man was killed. Another 8 civilians were wounded, according to local authorities. Shells hit the private sector of Kramatorsk, as well as warehouses and civilian infrastructure. All the details of this attack are coming up in our report.
We were at home. I was in the living room on the bed. I heard several explosions of some kind. I think the third explosion was strong. It hit the neighbor's place.
On the night of January 13th, Russian forces dropped an FAB-250 aerial bomb on the private sector of Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region. The explosion completely destroyed one of the houses. A local resident was killed.
I ran outside, rushed out. I look, everything's on fire over there behind the houses. I shout, "Uncle Vanya," but he's silent. I go to look for him. His wife was in the house, just behind the wall. I took her and brought her here, home. We started looking around, wondering where Uncle Vanya was. He was somewhere in the bedroom. Everything was welded shut. You couldn't see anything. We waited for the emergency workers, the rescuers. They dug through and found his body. He was already dead.
The deceased turned out to be Ivan Sadovsky, an engineer in the logistics sector of the Mariupol Inter-District Police Department, Donetsk Region Security. In addition to his police service, he participated in the cleanup of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. The man had been retired for several years.
He was a wonderful person. I always enjoyed talking with him. It's a shame.
Relatives and friends of the deceased arrived at the site of the strike. They are helping to clear the rubble and move whatever belongings survived.
He also says if anything happens, we'll leave. But maybe things will work out. It's the same for us. Everyone here is just sitting and waiting. We stay until the very end. And how much you want your own home, when for 20 years you built something, invested something, spent your health, wore yourself out. Who wants to leave? You just want there to be peace.
In addition to Kramatorsk, 10 more settlements in the region came under attack in the past 24 hours. A total of 8 people were injured in the region. Dimitro Hlushko from Donetsk region for Freedom TV channel. Russian troops have stationed their equipment next to the nuclear reactors of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This was reported by the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin. He published drone footage of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which, according to him, was taken recently. He emphasized that such actions by the Russians are a violation of international humanitarian law, which prohibits the use of nuclear power plants as military facilities. Let me remind you that Russia occupied the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in March 2020. And since then, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Energy, there have already been 12 blackouts at the plant as a result of Russian shelling. Knowing that we will not launch strikes on the nuclear power plant, the Russians store their military equipment here. They use the territory and facilities of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a training ground for their drone operators. There is even information that multiple rocket launcher strikes on Zaporizhzhia have been carried out from here several times. Vladislav Voloshin, spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces. Ukraine's defense forces continue to hold back the Russian offensive in the east and south of the country. Since the beginning of the day, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has counted 50 battles, a third of them in the Pokrovsk direction. Why are the Russians once again actively using armored vehicles in their assaults? And for shelling, which frontline city are Russian forces trying to reach? We'll tell you more about this situation at the front next.
Ukrainian armed forces continue to destroy Russian armored vehicles and communication equipment. In the southern Slobozansky direction, border guard aerial reconnaissance units delivered precise strikes, damaging 2 tanks, destroying a Morom II surveillance system, 2 antennas, and enemy personnel. Analysts note that more and more Russian armored vehicles are once again appearing on the battlefield. And they explain that the possibility of armored assaults by the occupiers is enabled by severe frosts, which have frozen the ground, allowing heavy equipment to move forward again.
How effective is it? The answer to this question is absolutely obvious. All the equipment the enemy uses, even though it is literally covered with electronic warfare systems and with physical elements designed to protect this armored equipment? No, it burns perfectly well. And that means the enemy is once again returning to their old tactics. Infiltration by small and ultra-small infantry groups.
The Ukrainian General Staff has counted about 50 battles since the start of the day. A dozen Russian attacks in the south were repelled in the Konstantinovka direction. The invaders tried to advance 7 more times. On the southern Slobozansky section of the front and on the Hulyai-Pol bridgehead, Ukrainian defenders stopped 6 Russian assaults. Russia wants to create a springboard for shelling Zaporizhzhia. This was reported by the Southern Defense Forces. Russian troops are trying to break through to the village of Stepnohersk in the Zaporizhzhia region. It is located in a strategically advantageous position, and from there Russian artillery can reach the regional center. And
the Russians, despite having entered Hulyai-Pol, the fighting continues precisely in that area. The settlement is being systematically destroyed by Russian aviation, including obviously to prevent our units from being able to defend and hold these defensive lines. But on the other hand, again, our countermeasures, our counterattacks, they do not allow the Russians to establish those footholds, stable footholds, in order to secure them and continue their offensive.
active combat operations are also continuing in other sectors of the southern front in Oleksandrivka and Rehovka. There, Russian occupiers are unsuccessfully trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses near several settlements, and more than a third of all today's battles took place in the Pokrovsk direction. Urban fighting is ongoing in Pokrovsk and Mirnorod. Defense forces are also hunting for Russian drone operators. This was reported by the spokesperson of the Operational Command East, Hryhorij Shapoval. According to him, search and assault operations and the elimination of invaders in the urban area are being carried out directly in Pokrovsk itself. The northern part of the settlement is held by Ukrainian forces.
In Mirnorod, our soldiers are holding defensive lines and eliminating the enemy in the outskirts of the city. To contain the enemy, the city's defenses have been reinforced with additional forces and resources. Logistics remain difficult. To strengthen our capabilities, we are taking measures to expand supply corridors to Mirnorod. Hryhorij Shapoval, spokesperson for the East Forces Group, in an interview with Donbas News.
Russia continues to lose personnel and equipment in the war against Ukraine. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the defense forces eliminated 990 invaders over the past day, and the total losses of the Russian army have already exceeded 1,221,000 military personnel. In addition, the AFU struck 6 tanks, 3 armored combat vehicles, and more than 70 enemy artillery systems. Russian commanders will also be short 3 MLRs, 5 air defense systems, and more than 200 military vehicles. More than 1,000 occupier drones will also no longer appear in the Ukrainian sky.
Russia is using at least 50 foreign machines to manufacture the weapons it uses to shell Ukraine. This was reported by the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. The GUR noted that Russian defense industry enterprises do not purchase these machines directly. Instead, they use leasing schemes. Thus, Ukrainian intelligence officers discovered equipment from the Czech Republic in the Russian Federation. It is used to manufacture naval and coastal radars, as well as equipment for missile forces. There is also information about pro-American machines used to produce parts for Kach 101 cruise missiles, and Chinese equipment is used to make sights. In the temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhzhia regions, the occupying authorities are creating unbearable living conditions for local residents. There are widespread power, water, and communication outages being recorded. This was reported by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. They note that the communal infrastructure is systematically deteriorating due to a lack of investment and repairs.
It is noteworthy that, at the same time, Russia always finds funds to create yet another museum of the Russian world, exhibitions, monuments, and to maintain propaganda media. Caring for people is considered an unnecessary expense in this system. The occupying state does not wish to provide even the most basic living conditions for the civilian population. The promised better life with Russia has in reality turned into a constant struggle for survival, for water, for electricity, for heat, for human dignity. And now a message from the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on Telegram.
Rescuers evacuated 3 families with children from frontline villages in the Zaporizhzhia region. They had to leave their homes. The residents were forced to do so because of the increased shelling by the Russian army. Our correspondents will tell you how the evacuation took place and where the people were relocated.
Rescuers evacuated 4 children and 7 adults from the Zaporizhzhia region. They left the village to the sound of explosions. It was precisely because of the increased Russian shelling that the families had to leave.
We were struck by an impact on the 6th day of the month.
We were shelled on the 6th, the house was destroyed, nothing is left. Thank God all the children are alive and unharmed. We left because we have nowhere to live.
The Russian army has been shelling the frontline villages of Zaporizhzhia for the 4th year in a row, but lately the intensity has increased. Sooner or later, a shell could hit the house.
Our windows have already been blown out more than once and the ceiling is all cracked. We had just finished repairs and now it was all for nothing.
I worked in healthcare.
I worked at a medical facility, it was also destroyed. Nothing is left. Kabi, MLRS. A Shahed drone hit my boss's house. Her husband burned alive.
In Zaporizhzhia, evacuees are accommodated at the transit center for displaced persons. Rescuers are urging all residents of frontline areas to leave for safer places. We are ready to evacuate everyone who asks for help, says Yuri Halinko, an officer of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine.
Sometimes it happens that we come to a village for one family and other residents come out onto the street and ask us to take them too, like today, for example. They ask that after we evacuate some people, we come back for another family. Since
last year, more than 150,000 residents have been evacuated from frontline settlements in the region. Among them are 18,000 children. At the beginning of January this year, the regional military administration decided on the mandatory evacuation of families with children from frontline areas. Ole Pritikin, Boris Yakovenko from Zaporizhzhia for Freedom TV channel.
The risks of external interference in the upcoming Latvian parliamentary elections from Russia are increasing. This was stated by Viktor Makarov, the special representative of the Latvian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Digital Affairs. According to him, it would be very naive to expect that Moscow would not try to exploit any vulnerability or loophole in Latvian systems. I would also like to note that the parliamentary elections in Latvia are scheduled to take place this autumn.
Interference in elections does not begin a day or even 3 months before the vote. Opportunities are being sought right now. They were being sought yesterday. Brussels institutions have tools to help with this issue, in particular an early warning system. We have an incentive. This is the Digital Services Act, compliance with which throughout the EU is an absolute requirement for responding, even to minor incidents. Viktor Makarov, special representative of the Latvian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Digital Affairs.
Hungary has officially set the date for its parliamentary elections. They will take place on April 12th. This was announced by the country's president Tamás Sulyok. The vote poses a serious threat to nearly 20 years of rule by Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. The opposition party Tiesa, led by Péter Máder, promises to strengthen the independence of the judiciary and fight corruption. More details in our report.
there are just under 3 months left until the parliamentary elections in Hungary. For the first time in 16 years, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán could lose power. Polls show roughly equal levels of support for the ruling Fidesz party and the opposition force led by Péter Máder, TISA. However, the situation could change dramatically in the coming months. Hungarian parties are ramping up their political activity, trying to win voters over to their side. The government party Fidesz continues to promote its anti-European rhetoric. However, judging by his recent speeches, Orbán's focus has shifted from criticizing Kyiv to criticizing Brussels.
I hope that peaceful efforts to end Russia's war against Ukraine will be successful, and that the Americans will have something to discuss with the Russian Federation. If high-level talks do take place, they will be held in Budapest. This remains on the agenda. It's not worth making predictions. The Hungarian government simply needs to make it clear that it is ready to host and organize such a meeting.
His main rival, the head of the Kisa party, Péter Máder, takes a pro-European stance. He criticizes Orbán for the decline of the Hungarian economy and the rise in corruption, and he promises to address these issues through cooperation with European Union institutions. While Orbán's main electorate consists of nationalists and rural residents, Máder is popular among young people and city dwellers. He mobilizes his voters through social media.
In less than 100 days, together we will dismantle Viktor Orbán's deceitful and corrupt system and build a functioning and humane Hungary. We can all see that change has begun, that we are the majority. It will be wonderful to work with new faces in Parliament, which from April will truly become a parliament. We need your help to win.
Brussels accounts have frozen 17 billion euros in financial aid to Budapest for the years 2021 to 2027. These funds are not being paid out because the Hungarian government is not implementing the necessary reforms in the areas of rule of law, tolerance, and migration policy. The opposition promises to initiate a dialogue with the EU in order to achieve the unfreezing of these funds. However, experts say it is too early to judge what kind of international policy TIS will pursue.
On a number of highly controversial political issues on which Orban has spoken out very loudly, TIS has remained silent, especially on the international stage. What we do know is that TIS wants to unfreeze EU funding. But TIS members in the European Parliament, who have been working there for a year and a half already, are critical of this EU rule of law procedure which is responsible for freezing these funds. When it comes to correcting rule of law violations in Hungary, it is really hard to say what the opposition will actually do.
Analysts note that Orban still controls the state apparatus, which he uses to attract voters. Viktor Orban has stated that US President Donald Trump may visit Hungary, and although the visit is not intended to directly support Fidesz's election campaign, it will seriously influence the course of the elections. Analysts note that recently the head of the White House has begun to distance himself from the Hungarian Prime Minister. Therefore, his visit is not guaranteed.
Against the backdrop of mass protests in Iran, the United States of America may carry out military intervention within the next 24 hours. Reuters reports this, citing two independent European officials. According to the agency, US President Donald Trump has likely already made a decision, but the scale and timing of the operation are not being disclosed. At the same time, it has become known that the United States has begun evacuating hundreds of soldiers from its largest airbase in the Middle East, Al Udeid, which is located in Qatar. They explain that this is a precautionary measure necessary due to rising tensions. Help is already on the way, said US President Donald Trump, commenting on the ongoing protests in Iran. He also called on people to stand up for their rights and seize the institutions of power. Meanwhile, following the United Kingdom, the European Union is preparing new sanctions against Tehran. Nikita Skoblikov will continue the story.
The number of people killed during the protests in Iran may range from 12,000 to 20,000. This was reported by CBS News, citing sources, one of whom is inside the country. According to his information, Iranian security forces are conducting raids on private clinics in Tehran, demanding that medical staff hand over the names and addresses of protesters who are receiving treatment. Let me remind you, the first demonstrations began on December 28, 2025 in Tehran and quickly spread to other cities. The reason? A sharp rise in prices and the collapse of the national currency. Over the course of a year, the dollar rose in value by almost
a very substantial and significant proportion, specifically amounting to a total of 80% out of the entire 100% available, represents the vast majority of the subject matter being discussed in this particular context right now. No punishment followed for the Iranian leadership because of this. It is obvious that the supreme leaders are counting on holding on to power this time as well, through repression and force.
US President Donald Trump threatened Tehran with consequences in the event of brutal crackdowns on protesters. In addition to imposing extra tariffs on countries trading with Iran, the United States administration, according to the Washington Post, approached its European allies with a request to share intelligence on potential targets within the country. In response, Tehran declared that, in the event of American airstrikes, they are ready to give, and I quote, an unforgettable lesson to Washington. Meanwhile, Reuters reports that American troops have begun leaving the Al Udeid air base in Qatar, the largest US base in the Middle East, where more than 10,000 military personnel are stationed.
I'm thinking about Iran. When I see the deaths happening there, we reflect on it. So we're going to get the exact numbers. It appears that the number of those killed is significant, but we still don't know for sure. So we will act accordingly.
Initially, the protests in Iran were purely economic in nature. However, the demands quickly escalated into political ones. The participants began to demand the abolition of the Islamic Republic and the restoration of the monarchy. According to Axios, a closed-door meeting was held last weekend with the US President's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and the former Iranian crown prince in exile, Reza Pahlavi.
How else can we possibly liberate ourselves from these chains when we are subjected to such overwhelming and relentless pressure, without any meaningful support from the free countries that stand on the correct and moral side of human history? please do not throw us under the bus by trying to negotiate with or appease a regime that has so viciously and systematically oppressed our people for 47 long years.
Reza Pahlavi was supposed to ascend the throne after his father, but due to the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, he was forced to flee the country with his family. Analysts note this as a clear political move by the Trump administration.
A secret meeting with the heir to the throne, which was immediately played up in the media, is, of course, a political signal. It's a signal that the United States is ready, at the very least, to consider Reza Pahlavi as a partner for further discussions on the Iranian issue. But this does not mean that the United States is ready to rely specifically on this figure. In the event of regime change, to the
brutal crackdowns on protesters in Iran, states have responded. The French Foreign Ministry emphasized that the current repression could become the harshest in Iran's history. That is why the European Union is preparing new sanctions against Iran. That is, the heavy-handed and brutal response.
The brutal actions of the security forces are unacceptable and show that the regime is afraid of its own people. The EU has already imposed broad sanctions against Iran, targeting individuals responsible for human rights violations, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and Tehran's support for Russia's war against Ukraine. And we are discussing the introduction of additional sanctions.
Kyiv also fully opposes the violent suppression of protests in Iran. President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that a regime which has killed so many people does not deserve the right to exist,